The last rays of the Arizona sun were slipping behind the jagged spine of the Dragoon Mountains when Samuel Rourke, a weathered rancher with more grit than most men twice his age, rode slowly toward the battered fence line that marked the far edge of his property, the old boards rattling in the wind as if whispering secrets of the land's history, a history older than his family, older than any white man who'd ever claimed a deed to it, a history steeped in the blood, prayers, and footsteps of the Apache people who once roamed it freely. Samuel carried the weight of a lifetime in his shoulders, his flannel torn at the elbows, his boots caked with dust from a day that had felt longer than the week before it. But as he approached the lone cottonwood whose roots curled into the dry earth like fingers holding memories, he saw a dim flicker of fire dancing between the trunks of mesquite and heard the soft murmur of voices. An Apache family, 3 figures, weary, hungry, and clutching what little they possessed in a worn blanket bundle, their silhouettes painted red by the dying light. The father, tall but thin from days without proper food, stepped forward with a mixture of caution and dignity, holding up an open hand to show peace. Beside him stood his wife, her dark hair braided neatly despite hardship, and a girl no older than 12 who tried to stand brave but whose trembling fingers betrayed her fear. Samuel dismounted slowly, raising empty hands as well, the soft creak of his saddle filling the silence, and he spoke in the low, gravelly voice of a man who had seen too many winters, saying he meant no harm, that he only wanted to know why they had chosen his land to rest upon. The Apache man introduced himself as Taza, his voice steady yet edged with desperation, explaining that they were the last remnants of a small band driven from government-promised land, pushed out again and again by soldiers who claimed paperwork mattered more than people. And now they sought only a place to rest for the night where no one would chase them, where no one would raise a rifle at the sight of them, where no one would call them trespassers, on the very earth their ancestors once protected. Samuel listened, squinting at the horizon, because the truth of the words struck harder than he expected. His own father, a hardened rancher of the old breed, had once spoken harshly of the Apache, calling them thieves and raiders. But Samuel had lived long enough to know that men's stories often said more about their prejudice than about the people they claimed to describe. The girl's breathing was shallow, and her mother tightened the blanket around her shoulders, and Samuel noticed the way the girl's eyes kept drifting toward the canteen at his side. Her lips cracked with thirst. Without a word, he unhooked the canteen and handed it toward her. Taza hesitated for only a split second before nodding and letting the girl drink, and Samuel watched her small hands shake as she tried not to gulp too fast, a gesture that pierced his heart in a place he hadn't known was still tender. He gestured toward the small fire and asked if he could share it for a moment, and Taza nodded, not trusting fully but grateful nonetheless. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind run its fingers through the grass, and the calls of distant coyotes announcing the coming night. Samuel glanced at the sky velvet, blue deepening by the second, and he felt a strange stirring in his chest, a conviction he had not expected to feel toward strangers, but something about their presence, about the quiet strength in Taza's posture and the weary hope in his wife's eyes, ignited a memory he hadn't allowed himself to revisit in years, the memory of his own son, James, standing on this very land before leaving to enlist in a war he never returned from. The world had taken from Samuel too, and maybe that was why it hurt to see suffering reflected in the faces before him. With a deep breath, Samuel said the words even he didn't expect. "This land, I want you to have part of it." Taza's brows knit in disbelief. The woman gasped softly, and the girl stopped mid-sip, staring wide-eyed. Samuel explained that he had more land than he could work, more than he needed, more than he deserved perhaps, and that giving a portion just the northern section near the creek would not ruin him but might save them. Taza shook his head at first, insisting he could not accept charity, but Samuel cut him off, saying it wasn't charity. It was setting something right in a world that had long been wrong. When Samuel pulled out the folded deed template he kept for boundary disputes, thin parchment smudged with dust, and placed it between them. The firelight seemed to flare as if the land itself approved. He promised he would ride into town in the morning to formalize the paperwork, that he would stand before the county clerk and testify that the land was legally theirs, that no rancher, no soldier, no stranger with a badge would be able to chase them off again. Taza stared at him in silence, the weight of generations in his eyes, and then he placed his palm firmly on his chest in a gesture of honor, murmuring words in Apache that Samuel couldn't understand, but felt deeply. The woman's eyes shimmered with tears that she rapidly blinked back, and the girl stepped closer as if drawn by Samuel's unexpected kindness. Night fell fully now, stars spilling across the sky like shards of ancient stories, and Samuel knew it was time to let them rest. So he wished them peace and walked back toward his horse. As he swung into the saddle, he felt the air change, the kind of shift the desert made. Before a storm or before fate took a sharp turn. He didn't know why, but he paused and glanced back again, seeing the family huddled together by their small fire, their silhouettes fragile yet newly hopeful. And the sight struck him with a quiet certainty that this single act of giving land would ripple far beyond this moment. He rode back toward his ranch house with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years, unaware of what the dawn would bring, unaware of how profoundly this choice would alter the path of his life. He fed his horse, lit a lamp in the kitchen, and poured himself a cup of coffee even though it was far too late for it. And as he sat at the wooden table staring at the deed paper still, faintly smelling of mesquite smoke, he wondered whether Taza believed him fully or whether experience had taught him to doubt promises from men like Samuel. The truth was, Samuel didn't blame him. Too many promises to the Apache had been broken by men with power, pens, and polished boots, but he intended to keep this one. Morning would come, and he would take the paperwork to town. With that thought, fatigue finally pressed into his bones, and he allowed himself to sleep. When dawn broke, the pale gold light washed over Samuel's ranch like a blessing. Sparrows chattered along the eaves, and the cool air drifted in through the open window carrying the scent of creosote. Fresh and sharp, Samuel rose before the sun fully crested the mountains, pulled on his boots, strapped on his worn hat, and prepared to saddle his horse for town. But as he stepped out onto the front porch, he froze in place, breath catching in his throat, for stretched across his land as far as he could see lined along the ridge, standing near the creek, gathered under the cottonwoods, positioned respectfully but unmistakably were Apache people. Not 3, not 20, but dozens, perhaps hundreds, men, women, elders, children, warriors standing tall with painted faces, mothers holding infants wrapped in woven blankets, elders leaning on carved staffs, staring toward Samuel's home with expressions carved from centuries of survival. They had come silently in the early dawn, their arrival as natural and powerful as the rising sun itself. Samuel's pulse thundered in his ears. Had he made some cultural offense? Had they misunderstood his offer? Had they come to reclaim the land entirely? Before his thoughts could spiral further, he saw Taza riding forward atop a sleek chestnut horse, his wife and daughter beside him, their faces no longer weary but transformed with dignity and strength. When they reached the front of Samuel's porch, Taza dismounted and extended a hand in the universal gesture of peace and alliance. He explained that word had spread in the night across the foothills, carried by riders and messengers, that a rancher and outsider had done what many Apache had prayed for but never expected. He had given land freely, without force, without agenda, without conditions. And because of that act, the tribe had come not in anger, not in threat, but in honor. They had come to show respect to a man who had broken the chain of bitterness between their peoples. Samuel felt his throat tighten as Taza said that. The tribe wished to meet the rancher who had given their family a place to live, to plant crops, to raise children without fear. They wanted to stand upon this land at dawn to bless it, to bless him, and to ensure no outsider could ever challenge his decision without facing the unified voice of their people. As Taza spoke, the tribe raised their spears and staffs high in the air, a gesture that resonated through the desert like the heartbeat of history itself. Samuel stood tall, overwhelmed, humbled beyond words. He had expected to help one small family. Instead, his choice had echoed across the hills and changed something far greater. The sun rose fully behind the mountains, painting the sky with brilliant streaks of orange and gold, illuminating the sea of Apache faces watching him with respect, curiosity, and something else, hope. Samuel knew then that this dawn would marked the beginning of a story no one in the territory would forget. And as he stepped down from the porch to greet the tribe, he whispered a promise to himself that he would honor this moment for the rest of his days.